So hello fellow Earthlings, this is Earthling 64554637228, and I saw that Joe Rogan put out a 10-year anniversary podcast. I imagine that it was a guy who helps him, young Jamie, who put together a bunch of little shortcuts of him perhaps saying the same phrase to different people, perhaps other people saying things that were similar. There was one story that I thought was hilarious. So basically, Joe Rogan, I've seen a couple of podcasts where he mentions, is it Iskaya or some kind of thing, some kind of special ceremonial drug that people in some South American country take, and it's an experience. Supposedly, it's a long, drawn out thing. You can like book a trip where they send you through the whole process of taking the drug, because I think there's like maybe a couple different steps in taking the drug. There's like the thing that you take at first, and then there's the thing that you take afterwards that begins the experience, and then there are people around you to make sure that you don't go too crazy and stuff like that. So anyway, I've heard him promote it a couple of times, a couple of different people on my own. And in this clip, in the 10-year anniversary, it's not an episode, it's like, it's like a blooper reel, but I think it's like, his typical podcast in that I think it's pretty long. It's not like 10 minutes or even half an hour. So anyway, there was this lady, and she was saying that she found herself taking his advice and going on the trip to the particular country in order to have the ritualistic experience, which, as far as I hear, is not completely authentic exactly anymore. It's a little bit more commercialized, but not on any grand scale, I think. Anyway, she found herself with a group of people. I imagine some of them who knew Joe Rogan and knew of Joe Rogan, and so she's telling Joe Rogan this in his podcast because I guess she'd been on a podcast before, and she's telling him the story of her going on the trip that he had recommended. And she's like, yeah, and she's talking to people, and she's like, yeah, Joe Rogan told me about this thing, so I'm here. And then one of the people says to her, yeah, but Joe Rogan never did that himself. And she's like, what? Oh my God. And Joe Rogan is laughing at her story. But he's laughing at, obviously it's the truth, or I think it is the truth, that he's never been on this thing, but he's been promoting it, to several different people, including herself. I don't know when she was on this show because I don't know exactly who she was. And I thought that was, wow, hilarious. That was like super funny. And then, of course, as I mentioned, there's a couple of instances of, I guess they went to the beginning, because I know there's young Jamie, as Joe Rogan himself calls his assistant, the guy who puts together all these things and looks for stuff on the internet while they are he's talking with whichever guest. And part of what happened, I mentioned it in another piece, is that at some point, I can't remember why, but I went looking to find out, well, how did Joe Rogan start this thing? And maybe I went on Wikipedia, and I don't remember exactly what the genesis was for him to start it. I think he was doing it maybe on some other means. He didn't really start off, it certainly wasn't on YouTube or the internet, I think, when he did it. I don't even know what YouTube's situation was at the time. But what I remember from what I read in Wikipedia was, about his past and about how he was into MMA and into comedy, way before I even saw him on whatever TV show it was. I can't remember. Spin City, I think it was. It could have been. But so they were going into it, and basically they were saying that it started off with him having, maybe 1 or 2 podcasts. I hope I'm not ending up lying, but the gist of it was that the guy who we had helped him to do, one podcast here, another podcast, and then Joe Rogan wanted to do 3 podcasts in a day. And if you know Joe Rogan, his podcast can be from an hour to 2.5 hours or something like that, and if I don't think that there's really any editing, because Joe Rogan himself, as far as I remember, when he starts off, he's like, and we're live. So he does a live podcast? I'm not really sure, because I primarily know it from YouTube, seeing him on YouTube. So I don't know if he started off live, but the point of the matter was that the original guy who started doing the behind the scenes work, the producer, maybe that's the proper name for him, it started to be too much for the first guy, because he didn't want to practically be living at Joe Rogan's house where he had his studio, doing these hours and hours long podcasts. So eventually he introduced young Jamie to Joe Rogan as a substitute for him to work for Joe Rogan. And so and in the clip reel, the 10th anniversary reel, I think you were seeing the guy who was the original guy before young Jamie in it. It's just kind of really interesting to see how Joe Rogan was able to come to such a prominent position in, can we say, media. This is just, when you look back, for him to have been aware, or even, I think it might have been just a relaxing thing. I wish I remembered more about the Wikipedia article, but I think it's really a good idea, if any of you guys who do follow him, to take a look at the article, the entry, Wikipedia entry, and see. It was really pretty interesting. I think he mentioned in another podcast, and as well as I read that his life and how he grew up in all these different places as he was growing up, and how he, I guess, was it that he got into MMA as a means of, I think it wasn't MMA, it was either judo or maybe it was judo initially, and then he eventually would have gotten into learning about grappling and stuff like that. But I do remember that he, between comedy and his podcast, I think it was a way for him to escape acting, because he did not like the whole acting scene that much. I can't remember what it was. I remember that he was mentioning that, and I don't know how much it would have affected him. His co-star, one of his fellow actors on Spin City, I'm gonna say, when Michael J. Fox was on there, his wife killed him. And for me, it was a domestic violence thing. I think she was an alcoholic or something like that. And I remember that was really an amazing, sad thing that happened when that happened. And he has expressed a couple of times that he was close with that guy, Phil Hartman. And honestly, for me at the time, it was I can't say that Phil Hartman was like somebody that I really looked up to as this amazing person, but I knew he was funny. I knew he was pretty funny. I think I'd seen him on some other TV show as well. And to hear that this guy was gone, it was kind of like hearing Will Ferrell, that something had happened to Will Ferrell while he was coming up, you know? Or even like, I don't know where he would have been at this point. To me, he was a funny guy. So, yeah, that was unfortunate. But I think that might have had some effect on him, as well as, you know, the regular difficulty in being an actor and not being at the top of the hill, because he was just, I can't remember. I'm thinking of this other airplane comedy. Was he on that too? No, he probably wasn't. It's probably just Spin City. But yeah, it was really interesting, and maybe I should go back and take a longer look at that 10-year anniversary thing. It's just that you know, since it's so chopped up into, it's something that, what's his name, Joe Rogan normally kind of does. It's like, well, I don't mean it normally kind of does. It's, to me, it's fitting of Joe Rogan to have this thing without any headers. It's just like you see it and you understand each occurrence as it goes into something else. So this is about some expression that he uses all the time, and I guess it's Young Jamie, because I don't think Joe Rogan had time or the desire to put this together. But or maybe people mailed it in and he took bits and pieces of it and put it together. But it really is like, you have to, I guess it's really for the fans who've been around for so many years to look back and be like, oh my god, look at that, you remember that, you remember that? Or yeah, he used to say that a lot, didn't he? And stuff like that. So for me, I know Joe Rogan, maybe in the last 2 or 3 years I've taken in 1 or 2 of his, maybe it's a lot more than that, than I know that I've taken in. But for me, yeah, I don't know that it's as exciting. Like right now I'm looking at this one where he interviews a black guy who met with a lot of different clans, KKK people, and reformed many of them, or got them to change their mind about what the KKK stands for. And it's an interesting thing. To me, I thought that he had met this guy years and years ago. I don't know if you guys know this guy, but I thought he would have met this guy so long ago, because I've seen this guy around and I know it's Joe Rogan type stuff. So I thought it was years and years ago, but when I looked, that was just a month ago that he spoke to this guy. Well, at least when it went up on the internet anyway. So I'm going to take that in, because it wasn't 10 years ago. And maybe I'll say something about that. Anyway, wish me luck. So you can like, unlike, comment about why or what, subscribe and or share. Peace. Thanks.